Everyone on planet Earth says you should be the best version of yourself. Most people don't know that you actually trademarked that because you said it before anybody was ever saying it before.
You need to keep doing your job, and you need to do this part-time, nights and weekends. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're not ready to own a business or run a business or take any great idea to market. I think the biggest thing would be don't expect people to help you in the ways you would like them to help you. What I'm doing could be really helpful to that group, but the truth is that, and what I argued and do argue still, people want more is satisfaction. So if I look at my life, if I look at my career, the most satisfying times in my career have been times when I have been either.
You should stay in the victim mentality. I gotta stand and fight for my honor and my family. That's how I did it, cause you know that's how it had to be. So now I'm slaying dragons and I do it happily. I told him I refuse to be another casualty. I looked inside the dragon's eyes and then I told him casually, hi, I'm a dragon slayer and I got a dragon lair. I'ma go and slay a dragon, then I'm gonna drag him there. I don't care, I ain't scared. Look inside my heart and there's a lion there. Conquering my dragons, I ain't fighting fair.
This week's giant is Matthew Kelly, an author, speaker, thought leader, entrepreneur, consultant, spiritual leader, and innovator. He has dedicated his life to helping people and organizations become the best version of themselves. Born in Sydney, Australia, he began speaking and writing in his late teens while he was attending business school. Since that time, 5 million people have attended his seminars and presentations in more than 50 countries. Today, Kelly is an internationally acclaimed speaker, author, and business consultant. His books have been published in more than 30 languages, have appeared on the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestseller lists, and have sold more than 50 million copies. Kelly is the founder of Floyd Consulting, a Florida-based management consulting firm. His clients include many of the most admired companies in the world. He is also the founder of the Dynamic Catholic Institute, a Cincinnati-based nonprofit organization that is redefining the way Catholics are inspired and educated. In his early 20s, he developed the best version of yourself concept and has been sharing it in every arena of life for more than 25 years. It is quoted by presidents and celebrities, athletes and their coaches, business leaders, and innovators, though perhaps it is never more powerfully quoted than when a mother or father asks a child, will that help you become the best version of yourself? Kelly's personal interests include golf, music, art, literature, investing, spirituality, and spending time with his wife, Maggie, and their children, Walter, Isabel, Harry, Ralph, and Simon.
Matthew, it's great to be with you. We've known each other for quite some time, kind of like passing here and there from this project to that project. And my goodness, I think this goes back. I'm actually placing a conversation that I had with you one time in where I was at the time, what house. And so that would put us somewhere in the ballpark, I think, at the late 90s.
Yep.
When we first started talking, or mid 90s.
Correct.
Which means that we've had a chance to watch each other's careers. And at the time, I think you probably would have sold maybe 1 million or 2 million books.
Yeah.
You're up to 50 million.
50 million. That's a lot of books.
I'm not great at math, but I do understand the book publishing industry. And there are very few people that have ever walked the face of the earth that have published, well, 1 million, let alone sold 50 million books. So you've done tremendous things. You've influenced all sorts of people because you've just got a great message. And that, you know, this is one of the, listen, I want you to do the talking, but I have to set this up. Everyone on planet Earth says you should be the best version of themselves, of yourself. And most people don't know that you actually trademarked that because you said it before anybody was ever saying it before. And you made that famous, and now nobody really knows the origin or where it came back to. So I think it's probably good to set the record straight that you're the guy who started saying that. And it's pretty awesome. And I built a company called Best Version Media, very much with that theme in mind of becoming the best version of yourself and every aspect of the business being the best version. So it's good for people to attach that saying to you. So, you know, other than the formal things in your introduction, what should people know about you before we dive into your business mind, your mind on human nature, your mind on making people the best version of themselves? What should we include?
I mean, I do love that theme. I do love seeing it unfold in the culture. It doesn't matter if people know it came from me. It's fun to see it, you know, mentioned by a president or mentioned, you know, by an NFL coach or, you know, school teacher or whoever. I really am passionate about helping people and organizations become the best version of themselves. You know, I think if you look at what I've done in the last 30 years, that's what I've tried to do. And when I've been successful, that's been the focus. So I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, you are a mission-oriented person. This is something that's very clear in what you do. But when you're a mission-oriented person, you have to think about, and I'm going to turn this into like business and metrics, because, you've run non-for-profits. I've done the same thing too. And one of the funny things is when you're running a non-for-profit, a lot of people go, it's not about the numbers. It's about the mission. And I'm like, you know what? The mission, you will understand the quality of the mission by the numbers. Yeah. Literally, the mission's important. You want to be good at it. And if you want to be good at it, you have to measure it. Did you know that Leading Giants has over 120 micro-learning modules from 4 to 19 minutes on entrepreneurship, communication, anything to maximize your influence? We are here to help you build the life of your dreams by maximizing your influence, growing a company, leading people at levels you've never led before. If you're in sales, having a greater opportunity for increased closing percentages and larger activity than you've ever had before. It's time now for you to jump in and join Leading Giants. All you have to do is press that button right down there. In order to access this, share with your friends, become a giant. We'll go slay some dragons. So let's talk a little bit about the idea that you have. If you take an idea and you're talking to a younger entrepreneur, we always talk about Matt. Okay, Matt is 32 years old. He's got a couple of kids. He's got a job that's a pretty good one, but he's starting to do the math and he realizes he's not going to really be able to pay for college or retire. So he's starting to figure something out and he says, I need to maybe do something else. How do you take an idea or a concept and then bring it into life? Because you've done this many different times in many different ways. What are the things inside the mind of Matthew Kelly that allows him to do that at abundant success?
I almost never risk a lot of capital. I'm very intentional about the release of capital, about the deployment of capital. And so if Matt, 32 years old, came to me and said, I've got this idea, I would say two things. One, we want a minimally viable product, so the MVP, minimally viable product concept. And two, you need to keep doing your job and you need to do this part-time, nights and weekends. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're not ready to own a business or run a business or take any great idea to market. The minimal viable product concept is fascinating. It came out of sort of Silicon Valley and venture capitalists where you're just throwing money at things for a long time. And someone would come to them and say, we need $300 million to take this thing to market. And then they get the $300 million, they take it to market. And the first week it was in the market, they'd work out 3 ridiculously stupid, obvious things that they didn't work out throughout the process. And so what venture capital firms are doing now is they're saying, actually, we won't give you $300 million. We'll give you $5 million. We want a minimally viable product, and we want it in the marketplace in 100 days. And we essentially don't care how crap it is. We don't care how limited it is. We want to see, does it work? We want to see, do people like it? We want to see, do people use it? And we want to see how people use it, because how people use it will actually determine how we build it out. And then they iterate from there. And so there's version 2 and version 3 and version 4, but the iterations tend to come fairly quickly. They also tend to come fairly cheaply, because what they were working out was most of the $300 million was wasted. And that isn't a good model for business ever.
Yeah, I mean, the proof of concept has to be there for people to dive in, at least at this point right now. Everything was so excited if it had a .com or it had some sort of technology behind it before, but people have gotten a little bit more savvy to that. So let me ask you this then, the idea of invention versus innovation, most of what you have done to build organizations, or even in your consulting with Floyd, you still do, Floyd is still an organization you're leading. So when you do consulting with organizations, where do you see the greatest efficacy, the greatest wealth being built by the innovator or the inventor?
That's a great question. I think usually the innovator. If you look at, say, the iPhone, Sony probably should have invented it. They owned a lot of the trademarks, and it was really inevitable. As you look back in hindsight, the iPhone or the smartphone was inevitable, but it wasn't the inventor per se, I think, that maximized it, because there were a lot of inventions that went into what the final iteration was. And I would argue that the iPhone was an innovation, not an invention. It was a collective of inventions.
We see the same thing here. And there's a lot of studies that show like the percentage of patent holders that actually make money in their patents is abundantly low.
Yes.
Everybody's got an invention, but that idea that you take something that's a good idea and you make it better. In fact, that's basically what we were saying when you're talking about the private equity and the venture money, that they're going to iterate on something over and over and over again until they get there, that you take action, you do something. So, okay, a couple of different things. You have had just many, many books. How many books is it now that make up that 50 million?
37.
37. Wow. Well, if you just stick with it, you'll be able to be prolific, I suppose.
Yes.
Or maybe you were a couple decades ago.
Exactly right.
So one of the books that struck a chord for a lot of people in the business world was The Dream Manager. And this is, an important concept of helping people's dreams come true. Do you mind just talking a little bit about that from a leadership perspective? The obligation basically we want to be effective, and how you've used that concept, which is, it's very related to everything else you're doing, including the best version of yourself. And, pretty much every concept, they're woven together. How does this one fit into play?
Yeah, so the Dream Manager concept is essentially you have dreams for your organization, and your people have dreams for their lives, and your destinies are linked. Whether you like it or not, your destinies are linked. And to the extent that your employees thrive is, to some extent, limiting or expanding the success you will have in your business. And so we talk a lot about employee engagement over the past 20 years. It was really my attempt to show that employee engagement doesn't necessarily have to have that much to do with work or the type of work or those sorts of things. And essentially, engagement in a human being doesn't get turned off and turned on as easily as we think it would. And so if someone is highly engaged in their personal life, they're going to be more highly engaged than the average person in work, just by extension of the fact that you can't just switch it on and switch it off, And the other side of that coin is true as well. If someone is disengaged and potentially even massively disengaged in their personal life, they're not going to be highly engaged in your work. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how good your culture is. It doesn't matter what initiatives you start. They're just not going to be. And as I was studying employee engagement really in the late 90s, what I realized was that the most engaging thing for a human being is to chase down a dream. It's one of the things that makes human beings really extraordinary and very, very different is we have this ability to look into the future, to imagine something in the future that's better, and then to come back into the present and work in the present to make that better future a reality. Okay. And we call that dreaming. And so our ability to dream is an astounding ability. It's unemployed in most people. Most people somewhere along the way stop dreaming. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that you might have enormous dreams. Most entrepreneurs do, but most people don't. 3% of any population is entrepreneurial. The other 97% aren't entrepreneurial. And so entrepreneurs tend to dream naturally. The other 97% don't dream as naturally. And also when they do dream, their dreams are not sort of outsized dreams. They tend to be fairly simple things. And so in The Dream Manager, in the book, which is a story and a real story, what you discover is people, their dreams are they want to take their family to Disneyland. They want to, own a home. They want to learn how to use computers, or maybe learn how to speak English, or, take their spouse on an anniversary trip to Italy, or they tend to be fairly simple things. They tend to be attainable. I think sometimes people think, well, people are going to have these crazy dreams and they're going to have no chance of. No, it's not going to be like that. They're going to have fairly simple, attainable dreams. And as you engage them in the accomplishment of those dreams, their engagement just goes through the roof. Their engagement in life goes through the roof. Their engagement with team members goes through the roof. And so it leads to success of the organization. The other thing it does is that if someone doesn't have a vision for their life, when you start talking about the vision for your business, they can't even get their heads around that. You know, if you want someone to think about your business 3 months from now or a year from now or 3 years from now, you got to keep in mind, most people are only thinking about getting through the week to the weekend. You know, so if you want them to get into that time horizon of a year from now or 3 years from now, the only way to do that is to get them thinking about their life a year from now or their life 3 years from now. And so, you know, what has always been sort of the core of Floyd and all of our trainings, all of our coaching, all of our consulting is teach people the skills you want them to display at work, but teach them in relation to their life. Because the absorption rate in relation to their life is off the charts compared to the absorption rate in relation to the business. So in this case, if I went in and tried to teach a team about, okay, let's put together a 3-year strategic plan, and most of the people are only thinking about getting through the week to this weekend, my ability to really get them to think like that is going to be limited. But if I say to them, okay, let's talk about 3 dreams you want to accomplish in the next 3 years, and now let's put together a simple 7-step plan for each of those dreams on what you need to do and how you need to accomplish them over the next 3 years. You've taught them now, and now they can very easily bring that thinking over into the business.
Yeah, I mean, that's a phenomenal thing. There's a couple of related thoughts that I have here. One is that seemingly is not a part of the business itself. But I always tell people, listen, everybody wants to know what they're going to get out of it. Why, you know, you have your great 5-year dream. And, you know, it's so funny. You've got, you know, the person who starts the paperclip company saying, you know, our mission is to be the most respected paperclip company in the whole world and take over the world of paperclips. That is utterly uninspiring to every single person but them. That's not a mission that is, you know, gets people out of bed. And then the other thing too is everybody says you have to follow your passion. Yet they have 500 employees and not one of them grew up saying, you know what I want to be? I want to work for the paperclip company. Not one. Yet they could be happy they could be happy there. Far be it for me to tell you what your own wisdom is, but the interpretation I have on this and the way that I've actually done this myself is I'm going to show you how this job fits into you accomplishing those goals that you want that are not related to the job, and that this is a part of it. And that way you won't have to, you know, say, well, what is my passion? Music. I'm not in the music business. I'm going to be frustrated, because really it's about 3% of the people that will do that, like you were saying. So instead, what I tell them to do is you bring your passion into the paperclip company, and then you don't have to worry about passion. And if you're waiting for the paperclip company to cause passion, that might not actually happen, except to the degree that this paperclip company will help you take that anniversary trip or whatever. And one of the examples in the book, if I remember, because that book goes back a while, is the custodial company. Yep. And the woman that wanted to buy a house. Just briefly tell that.
Yeah, I mean, nobody anywhere in her past had owned a home. She wanted to buy a home. And, you know, when they got into it, they hired a dream manager, which is really like the ultimate life coach. And when they got into it, they realized she's paying more in rent than it would cost to pay a mortgage. And just, you know, hadn't thought this through, wasn't familiar with how it worked. You know, needed help going to the bank. I think the company helped her a little bit with a down payment. And then she starts hosting this event at her house, like every Thursday, for employees to come to her new house. And so you've got these employees coming to her house every Thursday night, you know, and it's just to like have coffee and cakes and see her house. And of course, like the effect of that on this workforce, which is, you know, a janitorial workforce, that's 300% turnover annually, and in an industry. And, you know, these people start to see, okay, this company is different. This company helped this woman do this. Okay, well, what's going on? Things are possible. What's my dream? What's next? So I think that, you know, dreams are contagious. The accomplishments of dreams are contagious. But back to your point, I mean, the advice, follow your passion, is some of the worst advice, I think, in history, with the exception, well, it's been interpreted in a very bad way. It's maybe good advice, but follow your passion doesn't mean follow your passion to a full-time job. You know, you can follow your passion 3 hours a week. You can follow your passion on weekends. Just because we're following our passion doesn't mean it needs to be our full-time job. And I think that people sometimes assume that it does need to be.
Hey there, Giant. Dave Duran here, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our brand new e-newsletter where you will get the best of the best tips and insights to unlock the giant in you, build an empire, and slay some dragons. Sign up below. Let's go slay some dragons.
It's funny because we've never talked about that. You and I have never talked about that. And we've said something very similar about it, that there's a lot of bad advice out there that sounds really good. But really, when you think it through, it doesn't get you anything. Okay, so I have like many different questions for you. Okay, I'm going to start with kind of going back years ago, and this will set up what you're currently doing and why it matters and what motivates you about it and who you're trying to help. But if you were to go back to the 20-year-old Matthew Kelly, who, by the way, was already wise beyond his years. I mean, you kind of got out of the gates pretty quickly, so it's not like you had to get your act together like a lot of 20-year-olds, so you were ahead of the curve. But you certainly have learned a lot since then. What would the today Matthew say to the 20-year-old Matthew? If I had known then what I know now, what would that be?
I think the first thing, just to give more context to what you shared, is that 20-year-old Matthew had spent on average 5 hours a day in silence for 2.5 years before he was a 20-year-old Matthew. Okay, so we have to ask, why was a 20-year-old Matthew capable of doing that? And I'd spent on average 5 hours in silence for 2.5 years before I was 20 and before I started speaking and writing and doing what I do. And so, I think the first thing is that's never gone away. That's always been in my message. You learn more in an hour of silence than you can in a year from books. That's never going to change, because what you learn in silence, it's molded to you. It's just for you. It's like pure learning. And so silence, it's got to be a part of your life. Whatever it is you want to do, whatever it is you want to be successful at, learn to get comfortable in silence. Make silence your friend. I would say is the first thing. And then if I could go back to my 20-year-old self and give that person advice or tell that person not to do something, remind me.
Yeah, I mean, it was just basically under the banner of if I'd have known then what I know now. And that could be something to accelerate your success. That could have been maybe something you bumped into that you wish you would have avoided, you'd have done differently, whatever it might be.
I think the biggest thing would be, don't expect people to help you in the ways you would like them to help you. I think for a long time I thought, well, this leader could really help me with this, and this group could really help me with this, and not in a one-way street way, like really believing that, okay, what I'm doing could be really helpful to that leader, or what I'm doing could be really helpful to that group. But the truth is that they're busy doing their own things, and when you tell them about your idea and what you're doing, it's the first time they ever heard about it. And their cup was overflowing that morning already. Their schedule was certainly overflowing, and most things they don't ever get to do. And usually what you're asking them to do isn't a little thing. And so unless there's a really clear strategic fit there for them, and it comes at, absolutely the right time for them, you should probably count on them not being able to help you. I think that's what I would say, because while you're waiting for someone to help you, you're not helping yourself. And I think I made that mistake for a long time, and I still make that mistake sometimes. I have a situation just recently where, someone called me. They called me for help. This group called me for help. I came back and presented something which was actually something we were working on that just perfectly fit with what they needed. And they rejected the idea. And it was insanity. It was pure insanity. But I'd fallen back into, this is going to be the time when this group really collaborates with us and we do amazing things together. And yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, I think that most people, before they've accomplished something, see people who have accomplished a lot and imagine it's very different. And you can take, famous people out there in the world who are actors and actresses and politicians and business owners. And I've been around tons of them. And I'm telling you, the amount of failure that they have that is overwhelming. I recently got involved in Hollywood and making films and by the way, ask me what I've done there. The answer is nothing yet, except for spent a lot of time with people making a whole lot of noise on trying to get someplace to get somewhere. So we started actually at the time that the 2 strikes took place. So this is bumped around. But anyway, so I'm bumping into, and as to not be the name dropper kind of guy, I'll leave the names out, but they're the names that people would know. And a lot of them are like, yeah, I'm trying to work on this project with this person, and they're saying no. And you'd think, well, just by way of your fame and your rewards and the films you've been in, they would all just say yes. They're saying no. And wait, this person with this sort of influence gets blocked, and that person gets blocked, and they can't believe it. And for business executives, the same thing too. So when somebody hears Matthew Kelly, who's built all these things and has these books and he's the best-selling author, isn't he just going to come in and say, hey, this is what we do? And people say yes. And you're sitting there saying, no, it doesn't happen that way. You have to have self-agency and get to the next one, and you have to get through the no's to get to the yeses. That's a pretty fascinating thing, I think, for a lot of people who are hearing this. So is there a strategy you use? Do you just Taylor Swift it? Haters going to hate. You just brush it off.
I think the first thing is to remember that we usually look at it from a logical point of view. And so in our minds, it makes absolutely logical sense. And from our experience, it makes absolutely logical sense. But you have to understand that most decisions are emotional. Most people's decisions are not logical. They're not thinking decisions. Most decisions on the planet are feeling decisions. They're emotional decisions. And once you get into that space, well, now you've got a lot of things to deal with. You've got ego to deal with. You've got motive to deal with. You've got a lot of stuff to deal with there. And so the idea that you can predict an outcome when these sorts of things are in play, if everyone was really logical and made really logical thoughts, then it'd be a no-brainer. But that isn't the case. And so I think that the other thing I would say is that there is providence to the journey. And providence works best with persistence, right. And, don't quit before providence gets a chance to play its hand. And that you will look back and say, oh, I'm really glad every publishing company in the world turned that book down, because I wouldn't have started my own publishing company. And, 50 million books, you're selling them through your publishing company versus someone else's publishing company. That's a very different equation, right? So, like when I remember I had a book, it was just turned down by everyone. And I had New York Times bestsellers at this point. And for some reason, I just didn't want it. It went on to sell 7 million copies, and it was the first book my publishing company seriously published, And today we publish 300 authors, apart from my own books, and we now control the rights to all of my books except The Dream Manager.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there is no doubt about it. In almost every single story that you hear of success out there, it is simply because things didn't go the way the person wanted. And so I always tell people, listen, all you're doing is writing the best chapter of your book. This is a gift that you're never going to want again, but you'd never return.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, you've got big things happening. So, if you were to describe your mission in life, I think we might have already done that, becoming the best version of yourself. I think particularly in light of the fact that you're a dedicated Catholic, that means something more than just being the best version of yourself here on earth, but for the purpose of sainthood. But walk through, if you don't mind, what projects now are the most important to you. And I'll tell you this. Nico and I were on the way to lunch today, my producer back here. And he said, why are you... I said, ask me a question. He goes, what question? I said, ask me why we're in the car right now. He goes, why are you in the car? I said, to go to lunch. Ask me why we're going to lunch. He starts catching on. I said, we're going to lunch so we can get nutrition. Why are we getting nutrition? We're getting nutrition so we can think clearly throughout the day, so we can do an effective job. Why are we doing that? So that we can go home, we can face our families and let them know we worked hard for them to provide and that we did good for the world and society. Why are we doing that? Well, because we'll be able to build something that will allow us to share that and eventually have prosperity, share more with others. And why are we doing that? Well, then eventually you can retire and enjoy some of that too and bring more people into it and share your further wisdom. Why are we doing that? Because we want to go to heaven. So in summary, we are in the car right now because we want to go to heaven.
Yeah.
And I think if people can't draw that together, there's a problem. What is your story that looks like that, and where does it bring you today?
Well, I think for me, a lot of my focus is at home, and working on my marriage and raising my kids. I think raising kids in any environment has always been difficult. I think in the current environment, it's more challenging than ever before. There's that famous line, don't prepare the road for your kids, prepare your kids for the road. And when you have resources and when you know how to be successful, it is so easy to prepare the road for the kid. It is so easy to give your children a smooth road to walk. And it is so bad for them. Like you're just handicapping them in life, I tell my kids life is a problem-solving exercise, and not to try to rush past the problems, but to see each problem as, you're honing that skill. Because people at the highest level, what they're really, really good at is being calm in a crisis and solving any problem that comes to them, regardless of whether it has anything to do with their expertise. And they do that by, learning and knowing who to engage on a problem, which ones they can solve on their own and which ones they can't. So I tell my kids life's a problem-solving exercise and get good at solving problems because, I got problems today. You got problems today. Everyone listening to this show has got problems today. And guess what? If we solve them all today, we'll have more problems tomorrow. And so to recognize that, I tell the kids they hate this. I also tell them, we're not solving the problems are solving us. Okay. And so whatever deficiencies in character I've got, whatever deficiencies in personality I've got, whatever deficiency in virtue I've got, the problems are trying to solve that. If I work through the problems, they will, just by extension of what they are, they will help me become a better version of myself. They will solve me much more than I will solve them. And so, that's at the core of what I'm doing with the kids at the moment.
Yeah, I just posted something this week that said, your problems are your friends. The only reason you have a job is to solve problems. So if they go away, so does your relevance.
Yeah.
And I think you've done studies like this too on people that have won the lottery and what happens when the basic problems they have, which are food, shelter, and good behavior at work, now go away, and how they build artificial problems now they have to solve, and some of them are actually pretty life-threatening.
Well, we see that every day in inherited wealth, right? Okay. Why? Because the essential problem with inherited wealth is I can give my kids the money, but I can't give my kids the character that was built in making the money, And so unless you're actively trying to help them develop that character while they're growing, to give them a bunch of money at some point in their life is actually reckless and irresponsible.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I've talked to a handful of people who have had enormous wealth, up to $1 billion, and that's one of the biggest regrets, that they've given too much money to their kids and made them soft or poor decision makers.
Yep.
Because you don't have to go through the process of decision making the right way to get the right outcome. Okay, so what are you working on now, Matthew? You're always working on something. You're always building something good. You're always writing another book. What's your project that's big?
So Floyd has really, 20 years ago started as a consulting business. Today, the biggest practice inside Floyd is coaching. I think that the need for coaching is just enormous in our culture. And so, whether it's executive coaching or sales coaching or life coaching, that's become huge for Floyd. And so I'm putting a lot of energy into sort of how do we build the systems and processes to really serve the people we coach in a powerful way. That's been fun. Probably my funnest project at the moment is I'm working on a novel. I published my first fiction last year, The Rocking Chair Prophet. And that was fun. I'd wanted to do that for 20 years. And then I'm working on a novel which is set in Italy in the early 20th century. And it's set in a monastery, Monte Cassino, about 100 miles south of Rome. And a baby boy is left there on the doorstep of the monastery on Christmas Eve. And that's sort of the setup. And that's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. Whoa, it's a lot of work.
What's harder to you? Fiction, nonfiction, spiritual book, self-help book, corporate book? What is more difficult?
Definitely fiction. I mean, at this point, and that might just be by extension of not having done it enough. But at this point, nonfiction, to write a business book or a personal development book or a spiritual book, like that is very much a process that I understand. I understand where the ebbs and flows are. I understand where the blocks come, how to get out of the blocks, which I think is also an interesting learning for your audiences, because when I first started writing, I hated editors, okay? 37 books later, more than 50 million books sold. I love editors, okay? Because they keep me from looking stupid, okay? And when I first started writing, I didn't want anyone to touch my stuff. It's like, no, leave it alone. That's how I wrote it. That's how it stays. Back off, all you editors. And that was such, that was immaturity, and it was ego, and it was lots of things, right? But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of innovators are like that. It's like, no, this is how I thought of it. Leave it alone. Don't touch it. We can't touch it. No, you have to change it. You have to evolve it. You have to iterate. You have to edit. You need to, and all of that improves it, So I think that's been a great lesson in my journey as an author.
The iterations are great. I have my 6th book coming out. I'm 31 shy, by the way, and several million behind you. My first book that I've written 8 books, but thankfully only at the end of the next year, it will be 6 that are published, because the first book that I wrote was so bad. So this is something, I don't know if I've ever said anything to anybody about this before. I know I have ADHD. I'm too old to have been one of the kids that was diagnosed with it, but I have to have had it. And I would never trade it for anything. But a part of that was when I was young, I couldn't read a book. I would fall asleep. I would just fall asleep. The first book that I ever read, cover to cover, no kidding, is the first book that I wrote. That is not a flattering thing. Now, that book was so bad that when I gave it to an editor, now this is back in the day where, you printed it off, you give it to an editor. The editor reviews the book for 2 weeks. They put it on my front porch with a big red pen that said, "Call me." And I called them and I said, "What?" And they said, "If you publish this book, it will be the end of your career before it starts." It was that bad of a book. And it really was. It was so horrendous. And not to mention the fact that the ideas were immature and stupid, because I didn't spend 2.5 years and 5 hours of silence. And not to mention the fact that, I could barely put together a sentence at the time. So I ended up loving editors right from the start, because when I actually did figure out writing and I wrote my first book worthy of publishing, they sent it back to me. And I remember reading it. They didn't have any highlights or red. They just resent the book back to me. And I couldn't tell where their edits were. I just thought I sounded brilliant and it wasn't my own material. And then I compared it to my original document, and they were so talented that they could take the idea that I had and made it more clear in a way. So I started from a position of not being able to write and needing the editors. You were a good writer right from the beginning. And so that is like kind of a weird transition to go through in that regard. Okay, so you've got the
coaching, right? If you don't like coaching, if you don't like feedback, you're not a champion, okay? And you got to get the champion mindset on, because champions, they will listen to their worst enemy. If their worst enemy can tell them how to get that extra inch, how to get that extra second, how to improve in any way, shape, or form, because champions love feedback. They love coaching.
Yeah, how do you've coached many people, you help people with this sort of thing, you see what the things are that get in the way. What would you say would be, the top 2 or 3 things that block a person's success? So let's say you have a person who has everything that it should take to go out and build a great business, or to be an athlete. They've got the natural athleticism, or to be a musician, or to write a book, or to be a great employee, unfireable, but it doesn't go right for them. What are those things that are getting in their way that you've seen from all the coaching you've done?
So I would say for them, but for all of us really at any level of success, the question we should be constantly asking ourselves is, what do you know that you're pretending not to know? Because we know stuff, but we're pretending not to know it, and we're hoping no one else will discover it. And very often that's like blocking you. So let's say it's a musician. They may know a weakness in their music. They may know a weakness in their voice or in their playing or whatever it is, but they're pretending not to know it, and they're hoping no one else is going to see it. But the reality is they do know it, and by knowing it and telling somebody else, that somebody else might be able to help them with it. In the case of leaders in businesses, what do you know that you're pretending not to know? Most leaders know that somebody on their team doesn't belong on their team, and they're pretending not to know that. And they stumble across that truth maybe once a day or maybe once a week or once a month, depending on how much they work with that person. And every time they do, they tuck it away because they want to keep pretending that they don't know that, you know?
Giants, we need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants like you. Head over to Apple Podcasts and give this podcast a 5-star rating so we can build an army of giants and go slay dragons together.
Wow. So, I mean, I would put those under the banner of the virtue of prudence. They're unable to make the decision they're supposed to make and act on it. Under not having humility, having ego. They're afraid it's going to be discovered and they're going to look weak or bad. And under fortitude, that they won't do something that would be arduous and difficult because of the ramifications of acknowledging it. Would you say that sounds about right?
Yes to all of that, but I would put something ahead of all of those things, and that something would be the sheer busyness of their life is not allowing them to see it. You know, when we get busy, you know, clarity becomes confusion and order becomes chaos. You know, when our lives are rightly ordered, when we are pausing in our day to really have some time to reflect, you know, confusion turns to clarity and chaos turns to order. And the role of a leader is to help a lot of people, you know, go from chaos to order and from confusion to clarity. And if the leader isn't making that journey from chaos to order and from confusion to clarity himself or herself, you know, how is he going to lead other people to that? And so I would say mostly that's the sign of someone who is not having any time of personal reflection, because if they had any time personal reflection, they would see it for what it is. They would see the things that you just described, and they would know that their team, their business, their life, and the other person's life is going to be better off without that person on the team. Because the first person who knows that that person should be on that team is that person. Now, they might be pretending not to know what they know, but they're always the first person to know that this is not a good fit for them. It's not driving energy and enthusiasm into their lives. They're the first person to know, but yeah, we pretend.
That's a huge thing. Now, would you believe that I knew that answer, but I just didn't want you to know the answer? And now that you drew it out with clarity and prevented me from confusion works, it is true. You know, I always tell people, listen, you're not being compassionate by hanging on to that person.
Absolutely.
You got to get rid of them. They're making everybody miserable. They're making themselves miserable. If you asked me to go up and sing opera and you didn't like the way it sounded, it's your fault. I shouldn't be singing opera, and you're going to free me from the pain of doing it myself. Not to mention, then you're going to relieve the, you know, pressure in everybody else's ear for it, which is a really important thing. So you said something too. You know, when you're talking about a lot of different things. You talked about how one of the things you're doing is you're making sure you're building your family while you're building this business, while you're writing a different book, while you're building Flight Consulting. There's a lot to that, and a lot of people would say you need to live a balanced life. But you have, you know, been critical of that sort of thing. I'm critical of a lot of things, like, you know, listen twice as much as you talk. I'd give you 2 years. I'm like, you know what? If somebody gives you that advice in a one-on-one conversation, they're not going to follow their own advice because the math doesn't work, right? So people say a lot of silly things. But this idea of balance, you've challenged that, and it's a very legitimate challenge. So talk a little bit about the false idea of balance and what replaces that concept that's more practical.
Yeah, I mean, my business book immediately after The Dream Manager was called Off Balance. And at the time, the whole idea of work-life balance was really just emerging in a very, very strong way. And it struck me immediately as nonsense. I was sitting I remember I was sitting in a boardroom of a Fortune 500 company, and we were consulting them around their employee engagement survey. And the questions were like internally inconsistent. And we're trying to get them to change the questions, but they wouldn't change the questions because they wanted to measure the question this year against the question last year and be able to measure the results. And the question we were really arguing over was a question around work-life balance. And the question was simply, do you feel you have work-life balance? And what I was explaining to their HR leaders was the question doesn't work. The question actually is a lie, because when we ask people, do you feel like you have work-life balance? What we are saying to them indirectly is your work isn't part of your life. Okay? That isn't true. Okay? Your work is part of your life. It's a big part of your life, actually a huge part of your life. And so, 30 years ago, we started essentially through this conversation, we started telling people your work isn't part of your life. How do you feel about that? Well, nobody's going to feel good about that. If you convince them their work isn't part of their life, and we've done a pretty good job of that, no one's going to feel good about that. So why are we surprised that for 30 years, work-life balance satisfaction is like, just cratered? Because we've been telling people their work isn't part of their life for 30 years and want them to be good with that. The truth is the work is part of their life. What I argued in the book was that people don't actually want balance. They'll say they want balance, but that's like if you ask people, if you could have anything, what would you want? And they say lots of money. You just haven't thought about it yet. Why don't you go away and really think about the question? Okay. And you might need the money for what you need, but, people will have balance if it's on top of everything else. But they won't choose it first. And what I argued, and do argue still, people want more is satisfaction. Okay? So if I look at my life, if I look at my career, the most satisfying times in my career have been times when I have been either working a 100-hour week or laying on the beach doing nothing for a week. They've been the most satisfying times in my career. The average weeks, they're not really the most satisfying times in my life. I need them because you can't have one of these other two things all the time, but they're not the most satisfying, and that's what we want. When we talk about work-life balance, what we really want, we want to know that we can have a deeply satisfying personal life and a deeply satisfying professional life at the same time. That is possible. It's not balanced, but it is possible. You can have a very satisfying personal life and a very satisfying professional life, and you can have them at the same time. That's what people really want. We did a survey before I wrote the book with employees. We asked, can't remember how many, it was thousands of employees. If you had to choose between balance and satisfaction, which would you choose? I think less than 1 in 3,000 people, less than 1 in 3,000 respondents chose balance over satisfaction when they were asked to choose between balance and satisfaction. We don't want, there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's a
Yeah, and they want satisfaction through the balance if they had it anyway.
Yeah.
So you're jumping to it. It's interesting. I read a study years ago on happiness. I don't know if you're familiar with this particular one, but it was basically, what makes you happy? And the answers were big. They were like, God, my family, my children, doing things that matter, contributions to my church or to a charity. They're all big things. And then they asked the same people a different question, and it was, what made you happy today? None of those things showed up. A glass of wine.
Yep.
I came home and I put on some music. I laughed at a comedian. And that's a very substantial thing. It's the same people answering the same question, but it's kind of that way of looking at the moment. And for whatever reason, what you said kind of gave me that as a metaphor.
Yep.
As they go through it, which is a really fascinating, interesting thing. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what gets in the way And that would be, knowing something about yourself and knowing something about a circumstance that you don't want others to know. You're kind of hiding it, what gets in that way. It might be self-apparent to ask the opposite question, which is, well, what is the thing that fuels success? When you look at the people that have had the most success, the long-term success, not just one-hit wonder-oriented things, what would you attribute? You're sitting down and you're talking to your kids and you say, if there's this one thing, one character trait that I would tell you need to have, and if you need to pick 2 or 3, fine. What would you say that is?
I'll pick 2. One would be silence. You can't get enough silence to fuel success. Silence is the most naturally clarifying state the human being can experience. And so it's like we all want more clarity, but this is actually something that will give you clarity. You don't have to do anything, but the hardest thing in the world is not to do anything. And so silence definitely is one.
How do you silence your mind? You go into that and you're thinking, I got to pay the bills. I'm worried about the doctor's appointment. My neighbor's irritating me. My car broke down. I mean, the average person has so many things on their mind. How do they enter into silence without having all the chatter inside their head? And what's happening inside their head in order to have valuable science or silence, that is?
Okay, so, if we think about meditation, and it could be in any tradition, for the sake of this show, because I know who the audience is, and you think
and yours would be Catholic. I know, Todd, people know that I'm a dedicated Catholic, and if I have a guest on that is a pagan or a Catholic or of any other faith, I never am shy to ask them, well, what drives you? I always think it's a more authentic answer. A lot of people are afraid of those types of things on the show, but we all have them. Either a person is agnostic and driven by that, or they're whatever. So yours comes from that faithful Catholic perspective, but you also understand that this is not limited to that. Another person could enter into silence and find value in it too.
100%. Anybody.
Okay, so what is it? What happens here in entering into that?
So let's say that this hand represents the soul, or the essence of who you are, the self, whatever you want to call that for now is fine. And then this hand represents the conscious mind. The conscious mind is always being distracted by the things you do, the things you see, the things you hear, all the things you think about, constantly distracting. What happens in the silence, okay, and silence in and of itself is a form of meditation. Okay, so we're not talking about going off and doing a 10-week course in meditation. Just sitting silently in and of itself puts this process into effect. So you've got the soul very, very still, your essence. You've got the conscious mind constantly being distracted. The more you spend time in silence, this begins to slow down, okay? And this begins to slow down when this gets still, the two meet. That's what the great mystics of every age would have referred to as union with God, and that's where the magic happens. And so when you go into the silence, you don't have to make an attempt to slow your mind down. That's not necessary. I would say take a notepad if you're one of those people that a lot of things come to your mind. If it's going to be distracting to your silence, take a notepad. If you remember, I got to make that doctor's appointment, write it down. If you remember, I got to pick up milk, write it down. So that at the end of your silence, you have these things, but they're not going to keep coming back during your silence or during your meditation because you haven't written them down. You've written them down, and now you can let them go until you're done. And what that does is that allows this to slow down. And it takes time. It takes practice like anything else. You have to get used to it. The first thing I would say is silence. Second thing I would say is reading. And I would say reading across a broad spectrum. So, not just reading in your industry, not just reading business books. If you want to understand human nature, read fiction. You most likely will not understand human nature by reading nonfiction. You will understand human nature by reading fiction. You're much likely to develop emotional intelligence by reading fiction, the classics, than by reading a book on emotional intelligence. Not that you shouldn't read that as well, but to read across a broad spectrum. I like reading psychology. I'm looking at my books. I got 100 books in my office. That this is the 100. I've got 7,000 books, but this is the 100. And each year I go in, I switch some in and switch some out. But I've got business books. I've got personal development books. I've got children's books. I've got history books. I've got spiritual books. I've got creative books like creative process. I'm fascinated with the creative process of all arts. I've got philosophy books. I've got psychology books. I've got fiction. And then I've got my books for reference. And all right,
well, that takes up 37. There's only 63 other books there.
Yeah. No, there's 137.
There we go. 137.
Plus by 37, yeah.
Okay, good. So, no, the other thing, too, that's interesting about this, too, is, that whole idea of C.S. Lewis, by the way, to me, is one of the greatest people for the ability to learn through human nature in a practical sense. Like the Screw Tape Letters, I'll maybe go back and read, or frankly speaking, there's a couple of theatrical performances of the Screw Tape Letters that are even better than the reading. And because they put it's so funny. I mean, it's a comical, he uses humor throughout the entire thing.
Yes.
And the theater of it tells the story of human nature at such an incredibly deep level that it just absolutely never gets old. And you could read an enormous amount of business books or emotional intelligence books or psychology books and not get anything you would get from half of that book.
Yes.
Because of that. And it's just a great example of understanding human nature. But here's a point that I want to make. You immediately signaled human nature as an essential thing to be aware of and to know. And many people would just brush right past that. And they would say, give me a technology, give me a different science, give me another tool, give me a better CRM or back office. And I will tell you, trade all that stuff in, because things like AI, for example, they're not a strategic advantage because everyone has access to them.
Yes.
They are a commodity and will be more of a commodity. It's the person who knows how to redirect, steer, or not be manipulated or deceived by them because they understand human nature that's going to make it happen. You want to just hit on why you highlighted human nature. I mean, at its core, that was a big thing. And maybe it's just too apparent, but to the person who doesn't know how apparent it is.
Well, these things used to be developed naturally over the course of a lifetime. A lot of the technologies are taking this out of us, or we're never getting them, It used to be like when I was a kid, I'd come home, my mum might say, how's your day? Fine. What did you do? Fine. Teenagers today aren't that articulate. It's like, it's how are you? How was your day? And so, like, the reality is these people are coming to work in our businesses, okay? The emotional intelligence is very, 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 very catastrophically low. If there was an emotional intelligence ER room, most people would be in it and they'd be on the critical list, okay? And so, like, the competitive advantage of the future in anything is going to be emotional intelligence. It is going to be understanding human nature and the ability to relate with other human beings. And so that's why I picked that. I also have physical books. I do use a tablet for research books. So I have found that having a tablet to download 50 books that I want to research before I write something so that I am writing something original, I do find the tablet helpful for that. But for books I'm going to keep, I want the book, I want to write on it, I want to underline, I want to highlight, I want the physical book. And so I would say, to some extent, in order to really understand humanity and to slow down enough to really know who you are and what matters most to you, I would say you have to discard technology. You have to step back into the olden days to some extent to really work out who you are and what matters most.
Oh, yeah, but Matthew, that's for old guys. You don't understand how I was born and raised with the phone in my hand. What's your argument to that?
That's fine. Good luck with that.
I know there comes a certain point where you don't even entertain silly. I've said that before, like, you're engaging into an argument that is a silly argument. Why don't you let the kids sit at the kid table and the adults sit at the adult table? And when the kids start yammering on about something irrelevant, let life teach them.
100%. And if you're an employee, you can do that, but you can't do that here.
Right. Yes. That's, by the way, well point. You actually knew what I was talking about without me saying it. Okay, let me ask you this. You have an opportunity to just take the next whatever couple of minutes to share whatever has been left out of this conversation that we should have talked about with the audience. What would you tell them?
Oh, I don't know that I'd look at the conversation and say anything's been left out. I think it's been a great conversation. I think that, what would I tell them? Keep asking yourself questions. Challenge people in your life to tell you the brutal truth about whatever your situation is. Most people struggle to tell the brutal truth about anything. The people closest to us struggle to point it out to us because, they love us. They don't want to hurt us. They don't want to upset us. But if you invite it, it is an invitation. If you know the brutal truth of a situation or an opportunity or a challenge or a problem, then you can solve for that brutal truth. If you don't know that brutal truth, you'll solve for something else, but it will be only a partial solution because you've only partially defined the problem or the opportunity.
Yeah, that's the difference between the brutal truth and the truth. It's that wholeness of it which matters. Well, we have spent a great hour here with Matthew Kelly, and it's good to hear what's behind the guy who has had 50 million people want to buy his work to read it, and not only that, build a consulting company to help people make good strategic decisions in their organizations as well too. You have blessed our listeners and our viewers with all sorts of information. In fact, I'm already seeing some of the shorts we're going to pull out of this, Nico. Like, okay, let's just capture that bit of wisdom and just make sure that everybody's seen it and that gets a lot of views too. So we're grateful, Matthew, for having me a part of this. I've been grateful for our relationship for the past several decades. We knew each other when we were young men. Times have changed. The number of kids have evolved. And what's the next 30 years going to mean? That's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for being with us. If you guys listen to what Matthew Kelly said, you can be a giant and we can go slay some dragons. Hey there, giant. Thanks for watching Durand On Demand. I need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants. You know it, and I know it. We've been around a lot of people struggling, figuring out how to make things go. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this with as many people as you can. We're going to build this audience, and we're going to help people slay dragons together.